The twin suns of Zivar-3 shone brightly over the grand arena, a circular battleground made of black stone. Thousands of alien warriors filled the massive stands, their voices echoing like rolling thunder. The Varric, a proud and powerful warrior race, believed in strength above all else. For them, respect was not given. It was earned through combat. In the center of the arena, Ethan Carter, a human diplomat, stood calmly, facing Commander Xyra, the daughter of the Varric High Warlord. She was over 7 feet tall, her body covered in strong, dark armor. A long, curved blade rested at her side, its surface glowing faintly with energy. Her yellow eyes burned with confidence as she looked down at Ethan. "You are weak, human," Kyra declared, her voice sharp and firm. "Your kind speaks of peace, but peace is built on strength. And you," she smirked, crossing her arms, "have no strength." The crowd cheered loudly, laughing at the small human standing before their great warrior. Ethan, however, did not react. He had heard this many times before. "We don't measure strength the same way you do," Ethan replied calmly, meeting her gaze without fear. Sarah narrowed her eyes. "Then prove it. Fight me in a Varric duel. If you win, I will respect your people. If you lose, your words mean nothing." The crowd erupted again, excited at the idea of seeing their commander crush a human. No human had ever faced a Varric warrior in battle and survived. The duel was not just a fight, it was a test of worthiness. Ethan's fellow diplomats looked uneasy. Ambassador Reeves, an older man with white hair, stepped forward. "Ethan, you don't have to do this. We came here for negotiations, not combat." But Ethan knew the truth. The Varric would never take humans seriously unless one of them proved their strength, not with words, but with action. "I accept," Ethan said, his voice clear and steady. A hush fell over the crowd. Even Xyra raised an eyebrow, surprised by his quick response. "You do? Then you are either brave or foolish." "Maybe both," Ethan said with a small smile. Xyra let out a short laugh. "Very well, human. Tomorrow, at sunrise, we fight." With that, she turned and walked away, her long cloak billowing behind her. The crowd cheered again, already celebrating her inevitable victory. The night before the battle. Later that night, inside the human camp, Ethan sat alone, staring at the glowing blue sky. The reality of the challenge settled in. He was not a soldier. He had trained in self-defense, but had never fought against an alien warrior before. The Varric were stronger, faster, and more experienced. If he fought Xyra like she expected, he would lose immediately. But Ethan knew something the Varric didn't. Strength was not just about muscle. It was about strategy, intelligence, and adaptability. He opened his datapad and studied Varric combat techniques. Their warriors relied on power and aggression, attacking fast and hard to overwhelm their opponents. They expected their enemies to fight back in the same way. "But what if I don't fight her strength with strength?" Ethan muttered to himself. He analyzed videos of previous Varric duels. He noted patterns in their movements, weaknesses in their heavy armor, and how they reacted when an opponent fought in an unexpected way. Soon, he had a plan. "You don't need to be the strongest," he whispered to himself. "You just need to be the smartest." As the twin suns disappeared beyond the horizon, Ethan finally closed his eyes. Tomorrow, he would prove that humans were not weak. The sun had not yet risen, but Ethan was already awake. The air in the human camp was quiet, filled with the soft hum of machinery and the occasional whisper of the wind. Today was the day. He stood in front of a large metal mirror, looking at his own reflection. He wasn't a warrior, at least not like the Varric. He didn't have heavy armor, sharp claws, or superhuman strength. All he had was his mind, and that would have to be enough. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "You're really going through with this, aren't you?" Ethan turned to see Dr. Lena Moore, the team's scientist, and one of his closest friends. She wore a worried expression, Her arms crossed tightly. "You know me," Ethan said with a small smile. "I hate losing." Lena sighed. "The Varric are stronger, faster, and trained for battle since childhood. You don't stand a chance if you fight their way." "That's why I won't," Ethan replied. Lena raised an eyebrow. "You have a plan." Ethan nodded. "I spent all night studying their fighting techniques. They rely too much on brute force. Their attacks are powerful but predictable. If I can dodge and counter at the right moments, I can tire Xyra out before she can defeat me." Lena frowned. "You're going to outlast a warrior who's twice your size." "Not outlast," Ethan corrected. "Outthink." She shook her head but couldn't hide the small smirk on her lips. "That sounds exactly like you." Ethan picked up his weapon. A shock staff designed for self-defense. It wasn't as deadly as Xyra's plasma-forged blade, but it could deliver stunning electric shocks on contact. "Do you think I have a chance?" he asked. Lena hesitated, then finally said, "If anyone can prove the Varric wrong about humans, it's you." The arena awaits. As the first light of dawn touched the sky, Ethan made his way to the grand arena. The moment he stepped inside, the deafening cheers of thousands of Varric warriors shook the ground. They were excited. To them, this was nothing more than a spectacle, a human making a foolish mistake, about to be crushed in front of an audience. Xyra stood in the center of the arena, already waiting for him. She was dressed in black combat armor, her plasma blade glowing in her hands. She looked completely at ease, like someone who had already won. "You showed up," she said, smirking. "I expected you to run." "I don't run," Ethan replied, gripping his staff. Xyra tilted her head. "Brave words, but words won't save you." The High Warlord, Xyra's father, stepped forward. He raised his massive hand, and the arena fell silent. "The challenge has been accepted," his deep voice boomed. "By our laws, this is an honorable duel. Victory comes when one opponent is unable to continue. There will be no interference, no mercy." Ethan took a deep breath. This was it. Begin. The duel begins. Xyra moved first. She was fast, faster than Ethan expected. She closed the distance in an instant, swinging her plasma blade in a wide arc. Ethan barely dodged, feeling the heat of the blade slice the air inches from his face. The crowd roared in approval. "Too slow, human," Xyra taunted. She attacked again, this time with a rapid series of strikes. Ethan dodged, stepping back, twisting his body just enough to avoid the deadly swings. But Xyra kept coming, pushing him back with every attack. The Varric loved power and aggression, and Xyra was putting on a show. Ethan, however, wasn't playing her game. He wasn't trying to block. He wasn't trying to strike back yet. He was watching, studying. Her movements were fast, but predictable. Every time she swung, her left foot lifted slightly before the attack. Her shoulders tensed just before a downward slash. There were patterns, weaknesses. Xyra lunged forward, aiming for his chest. This time, Ethan moved first. He dodged just at the last moment, stepping to the side while bringing up his shock staff. The weapon crackled with energy as it struck Xyra's armored ribs. A jolt of electricity surged through her body. The crowd gasped. Xyra stumbled slightly. She wasn't hurt, but she was surprised. "You actually hit me," she muttered, eyes narrowing. Ethan smiled. "I'll do it again." For the first time, Xyra looked at him differently. Maybe this human wasn't as weak as she thought. Xyra took a step back, her golden eyes narrowing. The sting from Ethan's shock staff still lingered, but more than pain, she felt something unexpected, curiosity. No human had ever lasted this long against a Varric warrior in single combat, and none had ever struck her first. The crowd, once roaring with confidence in Xyra's victory, was silent for a brief moment, then erupted again, but this time with mixed voices. Some cheered for their champion, but others whispered in surprise. Ethan gripped his staff tighter, breathing hard but standing firm. He could tell Zyra was beginning to take him seriously. "That was a lucky hit," she said, rolling her shoulders. "It won't happen again." Ethan smiled. "You're right. Next time, I'll aim somewhere more effective." Zyra let out a low growl. "We'll see about that." She launched forward, faster than before, her plasma blade swinging in a blur of deadly light. Mind against strength. Ethan barely dodged the first strike, twisting his body just enough for the blade to pass inches from his ribs. He could feel the heat against his skin. Zyra didn't stop. She followed up with a knee strike aimed at his stomach. Ethan jumped back, avoiding it, but she was already swinging again. She was adapting. She wasn't making the same predictable moves as before. Now she was faster, smarter, and testing his limits. Ethan needed a new plan. Fast. His shock staff was good for defense, but it wouldn't win the fight alone. Zyra's armor was tough, and while the shocks stunned her for a moment, they weren't enough to take her down. So he had to use something else. The environment. The arena was built for warriors, a circular pit with raised stone platforms for movement. It wasn't just for show. It was meant to test a fighter's agility and adaptability. Ethan ran towards one of the stone platforms, forcing Zyra to chase him. The moment his feet hit the surface, he jumped, higher than a normal human should have. Zyra's eyes widened. Gravity here was stronger than on Earth, but Ethan had trained for this. He used the momentum, twisting in midair and landing behind her. Before she could turn, he struck her leg with his staff, sending another jolt of electricity through her body. Zyra stumbled forward, her knee hitting the ground. The crowd gasped. For the first time, she looked angry. "You dare run from me," she snarled, slamming her blade into the ground as she pushed herself up. Ethan smirked. "Not running, just making you work for it." Zyra's counterattack. Zyra was done playing. She charged at full speed, closing the distance between them instantly. Ethan barely had time to react before she grabbed his arm, twisting it painfully. His shock staff fell to the ground. The next second, he felt himself lifted off his feet as Sarah used her superior strength to throw him across the arena. Ethan hit the ground hard, rolling several feet before stopping. His ribs ached, and his vision blurred for a moment. The crowd roared in approval, their confidence in Zyra returning. Ethan groaned, pushing himself up. His whole body hurt, but he wasn't done yet. Zyra stood over him now, her plasma blade pointing at his chest. "You fight well for a human," she admitted, "but this is over." Ethan grinned through the pain. "Not yet." And with one quick motion, he grabbed a handful of sand from the ground and threw it at her face. Zyra instinctively closed her eyes, stepping back as the dust clouded her vision. Ethan didn't waste a second. He rolled to the side, grabbed his shock staff, and swept her legs out from under her. For the first time, Zyra hit the ground. The crowd fell silent. She looked up at him, blinking away the dust, her face filled with something Ethan hadn't seen before. Not anger, not humiliation, but respect. Zyra lay on the ground, blinking in surprise. A human had knocked her down. A human. The arena was silent. The Varric warriors in the audience had their mouths slightly open, their expressions shifting from confidence to disbelief. Ethan stood over her, his shock staff crackling with energy, but he didn't strike again. Instead, he took a step back, keeping his guard up. "Are we done?" he asked, breathing hard. Zyra's golden eyes locked onto him, and for a moment, he thought she might actually yield. Then she let out a sharp laugh. "You are clever, human," she said, wiping dust from her face as she got up. "But you made a mistake." Ethan tensed. "Oh, and what's that?" She rolled her shoulders, gripping her plasma blade tighter than before. "You think this fight is only about strength and speed," she said. "But a true warrior never gives up." Before Ethan could react, Zyra rushed forward again, faster than before, fighting against the impossible. Ethan barely managed to block the first strike. The plasma blade hit his shock staff with enough force to make his arms go numb. He staggered back, but Xira was relentless. She attacked again, this time using her entire body. A kick to his side sent him rolling across the dirt. Ethan groaned, coughing as he tried to get up. Xira was already there. She grabbed his wrist, twisting it until he had no choice but to drop his shock staff. Then, with one smooth motion, she pinned him to the ground, pressing her knee against his chest. The crowd cheered wildly. Ethan struggled, but it was useless. Xira was too strong. Her grip was like steel, and he could feel the weight of her entire body holding him down. "You fought well," she said, her face inches from his. "But now, it is over." Ethan gritted his teeth. "Is it?" Xira frowned, then her eyes widened. Ethan had wrapped his legs around her arm, twisting his body in a way that completely shifted their position. Before she could react, he flipped them both over, sending her face first into the ground. The crowd gasped. Xira growled in frustration, but Ethan was already moving. He rolled away, grabbing his shock staff and activating it just in time as she lunged at him again. The tip of the staff connected with her shoulder, sending a powerful electric jolt through her armor. Xira froze, her body locking up for just a second. That was all Ethan needed. With one final strike, he swept her legs out from under her again, sending her crashing down onto her back. And this time, she didn't get up immediately. Respect earned. Xira lay there, staring up at the sky, her chest rising and falling heavily. Ethan took a step back, still holding his staff, but not attacking. He was out of breath too, and his entire body ached from the fight. The crowd was silent again. Then, slowly, Xira sat up. She looked at him, really looked at him. This human wasn't just lucky. He wasn't just fast or tricky. He had earned this victory. She let out a breath, then did something no one expected. She nodded. "I yield," she said. The silence in the arena shattered as the crowd erupted into shock and confusion. A Varric warrior, surrendering to a human. Ethan blinked. "You? What?" Xira stood up, dusting herself off, then looked him in the eyes. "You won," she said simply. "Not by strength, not by speed, but by something far more important." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" Xira smirked. "Determination." Ethan chuckled. "Coming from you, I'll take that as a compliment." Xira turned to face the crowd, who were still murmuring among themselves. "Silence," she commanded. Instantly, the warriors stopped talking. Xira looked at Ethan again. "This human has earned my respect," she said loudly. "And in Varric culture, when a warrior proves their worth, they are no longer an outsider." She stepped forward, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "He is now one of us." Ethan's eyes widened. The crowd murmured again, but this time it was different. There was no anger, no rejection. Instead, some warriors began to nod. And then, a roar of approval filled the arena. Ethan smiled. He had done the impossible. But deep down he knew. This was just the beginning. The arena was still buzzing with excitement. Ethan stood there, breathing hard, trying to process what just happened. Xira, the fierce Varric warrior, had acknowledged his strength. Not only that, she had declared him one of them. The Varric people, once filled with doubt and mockery, were now looking at him with new eyes. A massive, scared Varric warrior stepped forward. His deep voice boomed across the arena. "You fought well, human," he said, folding his arms. "But words are easy. Let us see if you can walk among us as a true warrior." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And how do I do that?" Xira smirked. "By surviving." A new challenge. Ethan sat inside a dark stone hall, surrounded by Varric warriors. Xira sat beside him, her golden eyes sharp as ever. In front of them, a grand feast was being served. Thick roasted meat, strange glowing fruits, and steaming cups of something that smelled like fire and metal. Ethan hesitated as a warrior handed him a drink. What is this? Sarah chuckled. Varric War Brew. It strengthens the spirit. Ethan glanced around and saw the other warriors watching him carefully. They wanted to see if he could handle it. Taking a deep breath, he downed the drink in one gulp. His throat immediately burned like fire, and his head felt light. But he managed to keep a straight face. The warriors burst into cheers and laughter, slamming their fists on the table in approval. Zyra nodded. You passed the first test. Ethan coughed. There's more. She grinned. Of course. The night is young. The trial of endurance. After the feast, the warriors led Ethan to a frozen river deep in the mountains. He shivered as the cold wind cut through his skin. Let me guess. I have to swim in that. Zyra smirked. Not just swim. You must cross to the other side, climb the cliff, and return with a flame from the sacred brazier. Ethan exhaled. Great. And if I fail? The scared warrior from earlier grinned. Then we laugh at you forever. Ethan rolled his eyes. Motivating. With that, he stepped forward and dived into the icy water. The shock of the cold hit him instantly, making his muscles scream in protest. But Ethan had faced worse. He had survived the endless deserts of Mars, the crushing storms of Titan. He could handle this. With powerful strokes, he pushed through the water, his mind focused on one goal, proving himself. Against the odds. Reaching the far shore, Ethan pulled himself up, panting. The real challenge had just begun. The cliff was tall and jagged, its surface slick with ice. He dug his fingers into the stone, finding small holds to pull himself upward. The Varric warriors watched in silence, their expressions unreadable. Zyra, standing among them, felt something stir in her chest. This human was different. He wasn't just strong, he was determined. For a moment, she almost wanted him to succeed. Ethan's arms burned with exhaustion, but he refused to stop. He climbed higher, gripping each rock with everything he had. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, he reached the top. There, in the center of an ancient altar, a single brazier burned with blue flames. He grabbed a torch, lit it, and turned to face the climb back down. Victory and respect. By the time Ethan reached the warriors again, he was soaked, bruised, and gasping for air. But in his hand, he held the sacred flame. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the scared warrior laughed loudly. Well done, human, he bellowed. You are no weakling. The warriors cheered, clapping Ethan on the back. Zyra stepped forward, her golden eyes shining. You truly are a warrior, she said, perhaps even more. Ethan smirked. I told you, humans don't give up. As the warriors roared in approval, Ethan knew one thing for sure. His journey was far from over. The night sky stretched above, filled with twin moons and a sea of glittering stars. The Varric warriors sat around a roaring fire, their voices loud with stories of battle, laughter, and the thrill of combat. Ethan, still dripping from his trial in the frozen river, sat among them. His muscles ached, his skin burned from the cold, but inside he felt something strange. Acceptance. The warriors, once mocking him, now nodded in respect. Even the scared warrior, Groz, who had been the harshest towards him, gave a small grunt. Not bad, human. Ethan smirked. I'll take that as a compliment. Across from him, Thyra watched him silently, her golden eyes unreadable. She had seen many warriors break during these trials. But Ethan, he had endured. Maybe humans weren't as weak as she once thought. A new challenge. As the night deepened, the conversation turned serious. Zyra stood and faced the group. Tomorrow, we return to the capital, she announced. The warlord will expect an answer. Ethan sat up. An answer to what? She turned to him. "Whether you are worthy of standing among us." The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on her face. Ethan frowned. "I thought I already proved myself." Groves chuckled. "You proved you have strength, but the warlord does not respect strength alone." Ethan glanced around. "Then what does he respect?" Xira crossed her arms. "Power, loyalty, and most of all, courage." She stepped closer, her gaze piercing. "There is one final test, human, and this time it is not just against the elements." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. I have to fight again." Xira's lips curled into a small smirk. "Yes, but this time you fight one of us." The duel begins. The next morning, the warriors marched into the grand city of the Varric. Massive stone towers rose into the sky, their walls covered in war banners and ancient symbols. At the center of the city stood the warlord's throne, surrounded by a massive arena. Ethan swallowed his nerves as he stepped inside. Thousands of Varric had gathered, their voices booming like thunder, eager to witness the fight. And standing across from him, holding a long curved blade, was Kyra. Ethan blinked. "Wait, you?" Xira nodded, gripping her sword. "I will be your final challenge." He sighed. "Of course you are." A loud horn echoed through the arena. The duel had begun. Human versus Varric. Ira moved first. She dashed forward with incredible speed, her blade slicing through the air. Ethan barely dodged, feeling the wind from her strike against his skin. She was faster than anyone he had ever fought before. Ethan quickly stepped back, trying to find an opening. But Xira didn't give him one. She attacked again, her strikes precise and relentless. He blocked with his own sword, but her strength sent him stumbling back. The crowd cheered wildly, thrilled by the battle. Ethan gritted his teeth. He needed a new strategy. The turning point. Ethan focused, watching her movements carefully. Every fighter had a pattern, a habit. And then, he saw it. Each time Xira attacked, she left a small gap on her left side. It was risky, but it was his only chance. As she lunged again, Ethan ducked low, spun around, and struck at her exposed side. His blade stopped just before hitting her. The crowd fell silent. For the first time, Xira looked surprised. Ethan grinned. "Got you." Xira stared at him for a long moment. Then, to his shock, she laughed. Lowering her sword, she nodded in respect. "The human learns fast," she admitted. The crowd erupted into cheers. The warlord's decision. Ethan turned to face the warlord, who sat upon his massive throne, watching the battle. The old warrior stood slowly, his dark eyes locked onto Ethan. "You have fought well, human," he said, his voice deep and commanding. "You have strength, you have skill, and most importantly, you have honor." Ethan held his breath. The warlord stepped forward and placed a heavy hand on Ethan's shoulder. "From this day forth, you are one of us." The warriors roared in approval, raising their weapons. Ethan exhaled, a small smile forming on his lips. He had done it. He had earned his place. But as Xira stepped closer, a strange look in her eyes, Ethan had a feeling. This was just the beginning. The cheers of the Varric warriors echoed through the grand arena. Ethan stood in the center, his breathing heavy, his muscles aching from the duel with Xira. But inside, he felt something greater than victory. Acceptance. The warlord's hand rested firmly on his shoulder. "You have proven your worth, human," he said. "From this day forward, you are an honored warrior among us." Ethan exhaled. He had done it. The same warriors who once mocked him, who doubted him, now stood beside him, pounding their fists against their chests in salute. But Ethan knew this was not the end. This was only the beginning. A new challenge. That night, the Varric held a grand feast in Ethan's honor. Fires burned high, roasting meats sizzled, and the air was filled with the sound of laughter and song. Ethan sat among the warriors, a heavy mug in his hands, listening to their stories of war and conquest. But across the fire, Zyra sat quietly, watching him. Finally, she spoke. "You fought well today." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Is that a compliment?" Zyra smirked. "Don't get used to it." She leaned forward, her golden eyes serious. "But you must understand, Ethan, being accepted is not the same as being trusted." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" She glanced around, lowering her voice. "Many Varric warriors still doubt you. They wonder if a human can truly stand among us." Ethan sighed. He had come this far, and yet there were still those who saw him as an outsider. Zyra continued. "The warlord may have accepted you, but his generals, they are not so convinced." Ethan set his mug down. "So, what? I have to fight another duel." Zyra shook her head. "No, this time, we must prove it together. The test of loyalty." The next morning, before the sun even rose, Zyra woke Ethan. "Come," she said. "We have work to do." She led him beyond the city walls, toward the mountain passes where the Varric kept their greatest trials, the test of loyalty. The warlord and his generals stood waiting. Ethan's gaze shifted to the trial grounds. Massive stone pillars rose from the earth, and beyond them, a dangerous cliff dropped into darkness. The warlord stepped forward. "The test of loyalty is simple," he said. "You and Zyra must cross the bridge of valor together. If one falls, the other must save them." Ethan glanced at Zyra. "And if we don't?" "The unworthy will not walk among us," the warlord said. Ethan understood. This was the final test. Zyra nodded. "Let's do this." The bridge of valor. The bridge was narrow and unstable, swaying with every step. Beneath it, the endless void stretched below, disappearing into shadow and mist. Ethan moved carefully, his eyes scanning each wooden plank. Some were missing. Others creaked under his weight. Zyra moved ahead, her balance perfect. "Keep up, human." Ethan smirked. "I'm trying not to fall to my death here." They moved slowly, step by step, until suddenly, crack! A wooden plank snapped beneath Ethan's foot. He lost his balance. And then he was falling. A warrior's choice. For a brief moment, Ethan felt the cold wind rush past him. But before he could fall into the abyss, a strong hand grabbed his wrist. Zyra. Her face was tense, her muscles straining as she held onto him. Ethan looked up at her. "You saved me." Zyra gritted her teeth. "Don't be stupid, human. I told you, we must prove this together." With a final pull, she hauled him back up onto the bridge. Ethan gasped, lying on his back, staring at the sky. "Okay, that was close." Zyra smirked, offering him her hand. "Still think you don't belong here?" Ethan grabbed her hand, pulling himself up. "No, I think I do." They continued across the bridge, moving as one. The final acceptance. As they reached the other side, the warlord and his generals watched in silence. Then, slowly, the warlord smiled. "You have passed the test of loyalty," he said. "You did not abandon each other. You have proven yourselves as warriors." The other generals nodded in approval. Zyra turned to Ethan. "Looks like you're stuck with us now." Ethan chuckled. "Guess so." The warlord stepped forward. "Ethan, from this day forth, you are no longer an outsider. You are Varric." The warriors cheered. Ethan stood tall, feeling something he had never felt before. Not just victory, not just survival, but a true home among warriors. And beside him, Zyra smiled. The end, or just the beginning. Ethan had earned his place, but what new challenges awaited him? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. He was ready for whatever came next.